Hello there, and welcome back to Little Bear Games. I'm Josh.
I'm Andy.
And we're very excited today to bring you the first episode in a new sub-series we're doing called Game versus Game. Now, the premise of this is quite simple. We are going to pick a game mechanic or category or genre, and we're essentially going to bring you, I suppose, in some cases, competing perspectives on them. Sometimes we might even cooperate a little bit. Do you think that's fair, Andy?
I think that's fair, yeah.
I mean, we can agree occasionally on some things, can't we? And today we're going to be starting out by looking at trading card games. In particular, our focus for today is on the Pokémon Trading Card Game and a very, very cool game called Flesh and Blood. You could probably see where my allegiance is falling to immediately. I don't...
Pokemon, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Got to catch them all. I'm a 90s kid.
Yeah,
got
exactly.
Nostalgia. But essentially, absolutely. It's probably not Ash anymore. It's probably Marvin or something.
I haven't watched it for a very long time, so.
No, nor have I, and haven't kept up with any of the kind of more recent stuff.
No.
But yeah, essentially what Andy and I have done is we've gone away and we've played a game or two of Flesh and Blood and Pokemon. We're going to talk a little bit about the games themselves, why people might enjoy them, maybe some things we weren't so fond of. And we're going to end with kind of a conclusion on which of the two games we preferred. We haven't discussed this already, but I am hoping that Andy and I do have different perspectives, just so the podcast doesn't get tons of hatred for, saying one's better than the other. Because I know trading card game fan bases and communities are exceptionally passionate.
And I have mentioned before that I when I first played Magic, it didn't capture me in the same way other games have captured me. But I've got a bit of a bug for TCGs now.
Yeah, I think I have some responsibility for that.
I would agree with that wholly, and so would my partner. The collection's become a little bit bigger, and the money pot's been spent.
Yeah, the conversation generally tends to start the same way, doesn't it?
Yes.
Andy, there's this cool new trading card game. Or, I say new. Pokemon's been out for best part of 30 years.
Well, Lorcana, Star Wars, Flesh and Blood now.
Battle Spirit Saga.
Yeah, there's been a few you've introduced me to.
And I've got a list still.
Yet
to come. But yeah, we'll get started, and it probably seems fair to start with Pokemon, as that's one of the oldest and more well-established ones. But essentially, for those of you who don't know, Pokemon the Trading Card Game is quite an interesting game, actually. I'm one of those 90s kids who grew up when it was first kind of hitting the scene here in the UK, and it was obviously crazy popular. I remember Pokemon cards being banned from my school and subsequent schools I've either worked in or been a student at. And it seems to have been quite a universal thing. It's very popular in schools. Kids enjoy trading them. But I don't know about you, Andy, or whether this was sort of slightly past your time at school and stuff like that. But
what are you trying to say, chap?
Well, I think you know what I'm trying to say, old man.
I don't recall Pokemon. I watched the TV series, but I don't recall them being banned. Maybe I just didn't hang out with the cool kids that played TCGs when I was back in the day.
Yeah, those guys, the jocks.
Exactly. Tamagotchis were the things that I remember getting banned at school. Not to go too far off topic.
Yeah, no, we had those as well.
Right.
But,
okay.
It was haven't you said before Pogs for your
I did mention Pogs to you once. Maybe that's something we need to cover in a future episode. Sorry, that tickles me. Pogs. Yeah, Jesus, I am old.
Yeah, you have to teach me how to play Pogs at some point. But the Pokemon card game, it was an interesting one because everyone was obsessed with it and lots of people collected it and would trade them and that sort of stuff. As I recall, I don't think I ever played the game until, since we picked it up the other day and gave it a go. It's just not something that ever crossed my radar, and no one actually seemed to really know how to play it. Now, I remember a couple of years ago when we were first kind of getting into Magic, Albie referenced the fact he'd played Pokemon a couple of times before, but wasn't really a big fan of it. Said it was quite kind of dry and boring and you were just sticking energy on stuff and attacking things. But I must admit, I disagree with that sort of assessment of it. I really quite enjoyed playing it the other day with you. I thought it was good.
I liked it more than I thought I would. I've avoided Pokemon because I thought it was marketed more towards, I guess a little bit like Lorcana, it was marketed towards a younger market. Actually, I see the appeal in the game. And you and I have talked about this before with the likes of Lorcana. That can draw in a wider market in terms of our partners playing. And I think potentially Pokemon can attract our partners playing like Lorcana did. Maybe not as much as Lorcana. So I think I agree with you. I enjoyed the game. I don't necessarily agree with Albie, but maybe when Albie played it that time ago, it was ever so slightly different. I don't know if the game has adapted. Being a new player to the Pokemon card trading game, I don't know if it's changed in the last 5-10 years much from how it started out.
Well, from the little bit of reading I've done, I think it's done a fairly traditional trading card game route. You've had new sets coming out. I believe some of those sets have introduced new mechanics. You've got the kind of EX cards and stuff that have come out. And yeah, I think there has been, but the assessment I get from it is that it's not as boggy as, say, something like Magic is.
Okay, yeah, Magic is boggy.
Where you've got this kind of cornucopia of keywords to remember and mechanics from sets from 20 years ago that kind of don't really apply anymore and all this sort of stuff. Yeah, but something that really kind of captured me with Pokemon is when you're playing the game, essentially you have your bench, which is of up to 5 Pokemon, which are inactive. And then you've got your active Pokemon out doing the actual battling and fighting. And I really like the fact that there's almost a certain push your luck element to it, where I had my Kangaskhan out, who was bodying a lot of your stuff and sort of taking it out quite quickly. But he was picking up damage as he went. And I was having to kind of weigh that up in terms of, do I keep Kangaskhan out and then hopefully knock out another one of Andy's Pokemon so I can get another prize card? And, I was nearing 6, which is the amount you need to win the game. But then I was also thinking, well, actually, if Andy does something tricky here and gets something out quickly and it does some damage in a way I'm not expecting, then he gets he gets to pick up 2 prize cards. I've lost Kangaskhan, invested loads of energy into it.
Yeah.
Is it better for me to retreat him or switch him out and bring something else out? And I quite like that element that you're not just going wide like you can do in Magic or Yu-Gi-Oh! Or something like that, where you just get loads of things out. It's more that I've got one thing, how much do I invest in it? At what point do I bring it back? Maybe see if I've got something to try and heal it. And it's that kind of, I suppose, investment of focus in this one thing, and there's a certain simplicity to that I really liked.
I liked the simplicity of it. I think you've nailed it on the head. Having that one character out attacking and being able to swap them out when you need to and just thinking about your strategy.
Yeah, and I think strategy is a really key part of it because you are focusing on this one thing and it's really important. It's almost like those of you who are familiar with games like Magic and other card games with the kind of Voltron strategy where you have one thing and you kind of build it up really big. It's sort of like that mixed with, having other things on the bench as well. So you're not just relying on the one, but your focus is pretty much always on one thing. And that's something I really enjoyed in it. And I think I also quite like the element that there weren't instants. So you can't really mess someone up on their turn when you're not the active player. But at the same time, I found I was still considering what you were doing, what you had out. I had to kind of think ahead and think about what's Andy going to do on his turn? Yeah. How's he going to respond to what I'm doing with what he can? I wasn't kind of playing cards and thinking, well, there's a chance that's going to get blown up before I get to actually do anything with it.
Yes. I like that you could have... So thinking about going off that, you would evolve your Pokemon on your bench. And so you're right, there's no instance, but you're watching your opponent evolve their Pokemon and add energy to the Pokemon that's on the bench. And you're thinking, okay, so are they going to switch out their Pokemon? Are they going to retreat one and bring the next one out? And then you've got your supporter card, so your trainers, ability to scroll through your deck and find other Pokemon. I found the appeal of it just because it is simple. We got into the game very, very easy. Considering we didn't have a demo of the game, you and I spoke to a very nice guy in our local board game shop. He gave us an idea of what kind of decks to buy. So we were learning. I was certainly learning from scratch, and I realized there are different levels of decks. So you've got sort of level 1, level 2, level
1,
3.
2, and 3. Yeah.
So that's quite interesting. And I didn't have that approach. to the game that I had with Magic, where it was really overwhelming because there were so many keywords to learn and different strategies. Now, it's probably helped by the fact that I have played Magic, and that is a more, I think, complex game than Pokemon. So it's probably helped that I've played Magic. But I feel like if I had played Pokemon first, it might have been an easier transition into me playing trading card games.
Well, I think actually, now that I've played so many trading card games and played the various starters and things like that, I think Pokemon's actually done it probably the best for me. I think between Pokemon or Battle Spirit Saga, the starter decks for both those games are done really well in that they're pretty straightforward cards. They come with tokens, they come with, albeit paper, sort of playmats, really good instruction booklets, that kind of stuff. And I think that's been really, really useful. Whereas something like Magic, even, you think about Commander starter decks, Commander decks, you think about the initial starter decks they used to do back in the day, which they've actually kind of discontinued now. They weren't great for it. I remember back when I first started playing Magic in 7th edition, and they did small sort of starter decks, and they were pretty good. That was probably the best I remember them doing it, because they came with a strategy guide in terms of how to play the deck, a small rule book, all this kind of stuff, and a game mat, and that was cool.
Yeah.
But as we know, and even back then, whatever year that was, there's still that vast dictionary's worth of keywords.
Yes.
And I think one of the nice things in Pokemon as well was the fact that the cards in these starter decks you and I bought for this podcast was the cards had reminders on them.
Yeah.
So it was stuff like my Kangaskhan EX was, when this is knocked out, your opponent gets 2 prize cards.
That's right.
Something that would be quite easy to forget on your first game.
And the trainer cards will say that you can only play one of these per turn.
Yeah, nice little reminders and stuff, which really, really helped. And, it came with that nice little plastic coin, which was useful and stuff.
The plastic coin's interesting because that brings me on to a point I was going to mention before. The element I like to it is there's a little bit of, I can see that your card can do 100 damage to me. But then you've got an element of, every time I flip this coin, if it's heads, I'm doing an extra 50 damage to you. So as much as you try and plan ahead for the kind of Pokemon that you've got out, actually you could do a lot more damage to me than I'm expecting because of that luck element to it. And I thought I would not enjoy that, but actually, even though, you kicked my butt with it and beat my Melmetal by flipping the coin so many times, I actually quite enjoyed that. There was just something to it. It wasn't I guess it was because you weren't beating me through a strategy. It was just pure luck. It was just like, that's the way it is that it's a roll of a dice kind of thing, and I like that element to it. So,
and something I found quite interesting about that as well is when we bought the decks from the chap from GMT Toys and Games in Weston-super-Mare, please sponsor us. He sold it to us as like, your deck would probably have a slight advantage over mine because all of your metal Pokemon had resistance to grass, which is what most of my deck was. I wanted the grass because I like Kangaskhan and it was the only one on the front covers I recognised. And I think when we were talking about doing this, I was like, I always like the grass ones. They were quite cool, poisoned, and I like my insects and stuff like that. And I was like, okay, I'll just be prepared to maybe be at a slight disadvantage. But I didn't feel underpowered at all. And I know I won, but I mean, it'd be interesting to get your thoughts on this, but I still felt that game could have gone either way, potentially, in terms of I did get a bit lucky around card draw, coin flips, stuff like that.
Yeah, I didn't feel that I had got my butt whooped like I had done playing Battle Spirit Saga, where I lost 8 games in a row. I very much felt that it was just it was a fun game. I played that and had a smile on my face. It was good.
Was there anything you didn't like about it? Anything that kind of held you back on it at all?
Nothing that springs to mind. I can't say that I hated any element of it. That said, it's one deck one game that we've played together. We did start a game previously, but we had to stop it. So I think there's still room for me to find something that I don't necessarily enjoy about it. We need to play it a bit more, and I'm willing and looking forward to playing it a bit more, if I'm honest.
Yeah, me too. I doesn't feel shallow. I still feel there's some depth to go into with it, which is good. Whether that plateaus at some point, I'm not sure. But I suppose I'm sort of, although this episode's about Pokemon and Flesh and Blood, we keep referring to Magic because that's, for both of us, our best developed frame of reference to talk about.
Certainly for me, the first TCG. So, and one that's more complex. So Flesh and Blood, as we'll come on to, isn't a simple game.
No.
It has depth to it and complexity. And maybe this is a good segue into us moving on to Flesh and Blood as the comparison. It was something that I thought I grasped quite well at the Games Expo when we played the demo. I think we realised that the demo that was given to us was quite simplistic, and there are other rules in there that weren't explained to us. So we were learning those as we were playing. And I wonder what your thoughts are on Flesh and Blood as a complex game.
So I think it's a really interesting game, and for those of you who don't know about Flesh and Blood, because I appreciate we explained kind of in a nutshell what Pokemon was, but I do think a vast majority of people listening will get the basic premise of Pokemon anyway.
Yes.
But Flesh and Blood's it's an interesting game because it's not really kind of vast armies of monsters battling each other or things like that. It's two heroes who are essentially engaging in a fight to the death. And along the way, they have kind of various equipment they can use. They have various weapons they can use. And the cards in your deck are essentially their attacks, their defense. And so rather than a Blue Eyes White Dragon, you'll play a Right Hook. Or instead of a Exodia, you'll be playing a, flip kick or something like that. And then the other person's trying to block it. And I tend to agree with what you were saying. When we were at the Games Expo, I think the guy who ran the demo with us did exactly the right thing in terms of keeping it very simple. And it was very, like I've used that old analogy, like a knife fight in a phone booth. It was very tight, very quick, very punchy. And then when we played it ourselves earlier on, it got very dense very, very quickly.
Yeah, it didn't help that I decided to pick one of the hardest difficulties of the 3 starter decks that I collected. And so when we played the starter deck, there wasn't very much in terms of equipment that we were explained to. So that was a new concept, is the cards that you play are also your mana, aren't they? So you're choosing to throw a punch at Josh and then using one of the cards from your hand to pay for that attack. Those then go back into the bottom of your deck.
Yeah, it's funny actually, because I quite like trading card games that do that, or card games in general, where your resources are also the cards in your hand, not in the same way as Magic, where it's or Pokemon, where you're playing like an energy or a land or something like that. But I like it where you're just discarding cards. And in fact, last episode when we were discussing the Games Expo, Tristan Hall's games, the historical ones that we were mentioning, they work that exact same way. So you're kind of doing this balancing act of, okay, I can play a really big, effective attack here, but it might mean me discarding quite a few cards from my hand.
Yes.
Vice versa, okay, I can do these kind of quick little attacks and pay for them quite cheaply by only getting rid of one.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, as we found, there's so much depth to it. That element of the attacks you play, I in fact, just to go back quickly, at the start of your turn, you have one action point, essentially. So it means that you can only play one card, unless the card has the keyword "go again" on it, which then lets you play another card. And I actually found that very reminiscent of certain deck builders, and I don't want to get into Dominion again because we've discussed it loads.
Yeah.
But like in Dominion, in your first couple of turns, you're only really playing like one card, and then you need other cards that say +1 action to make these longer turns.
Moonrakers is like that, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's very, very similar in terms of how Flesh and Blood plays. It's some of the, I suppose, like assassin heroes or ninjas or things like that, will have lots of very cheap, if not free, attacks with Go Again. So they're just coming at you lightning fast,
Yes.
but not doing much damage. But then you've got these kind of more tanky, Bruce-ish heroes who will maybe only play one card per turn, but it's going to hit you for kind of like a third of your life.
Yeah. And also to mention, sort of when you attack the other way, the way you defend with this is that if on Josh's turn he attacks me, I can defend with cards that I potentially have, my equipment, etc. But I can also defend with cards in my hand, and I found that sort of risk reward. Am I going to play the cards from my hand to defend, knowing that I'm not going to be able to draw my hand back up so I can attack next time? So it's that balancing act of, okay, I'll play this one card, maybe two cards, defend. Okay, actually he's hit me quite hard. I need to defend with all my cards if I don't want to die, for instance. And then you don't have any cards to attack with on the next turn.
Yeah, that's definitely the kind of balancing act I'm talking about. And that's, in the end, kind of how you ended up losing, wasn't it?
Yes.
I was kind of swinging out quite wide every turn. You were investing lots of cards in blocking my attacks. But then on your turn, you were like playing a card or passing, because you'd used lots of your resources to block me out.
Yeah. So I'd draw 4 cards and end my turn, because you sort of end your turn with drawing 4 cards.
Yeah, and it is a really kind of tricky mechanic. I keep using that phrase balancing act, but it's the best way I can kind of describe it. I think I really enjoyed Flesh and Blood for different reasons to Pokemon. There's that similarity I felt to a degree of you've got one hero, you've got one Pokemon out.
Yes.
But obviously it's very different in terms of having very long turns, being able to go around defense, not just kind of through it in that respect. You've got responses on your opponent's turns, so you can affect kind of stuff they're doing and do horrible things to them. I love the artwork and I really like the heroes, and that's something I really want to kind of get into, is explore what other heroes are available and what they do, what their focus is, what their backstory is. Because I understand there's a real rich kind of lore to Flesh and Blood as well, and that's something I'd be quite interested in looking at some point.
So that's a good point with the lore and stuff, because one of the things that really drew me into the game when they were talking about it at the Games Expo to us was that there's Blitz, which is the smaller game, and then is it CC?
Yeah.
CC, which is the bigger game where you sort of build a 60 card deck rather than you sort of 40 cards or so, whatever it is in the Blitz. And what's nice about that is Blitz, your heroes tend to be the younger, inexperienced heroes, and then when you move to CC, you can have the same heroes, but they are then older, stronger, and that's quite cool. Yeah, so I look forward to playing the bigger decks as well with some of the heroes that I find in the Blitz that I will enjoy.
Yeah, and what's really nice is we mentioned this on the Games Expo podcast, but just the affordability of it. Like the fact we got one of those boxes with kind of free starter decks in it, mats, booster packs, all that sort of stuff. And I mean, you and I have literally played a game with a hero each.
Yes.
You were the mystic or illusionist, I want to say.
Enigma, illusionist, yeah.
And I was New, the assassin. But it'd be interesting to just see how these other classes, these other heroes play and what they are able to do. Was there anything you didn't like about it? Anything that kind of, again, similar to what I asked Pokemon, anything that kind of held you back on it a bit?
I think what I didn't like about it and held me back, but it's not necessarily game's fault. It's my fault. Being new at the game and picking a 5-star difficulty, as the deck said, I was inexperienced with it. So a Blitz game is supposed to last 20-ish minutes.
Yeah.
This game took us a little bit longer. So there was a bit of a frustration with learning that and sort of having to look up rules as we were going along. But that's not necessarily the game's fault. I don't think there was anything I disliked about the game that I can think of off the top of my head. Was there anything that sort of got your goat, so to speak?
No, I thought it was really cool. And I see a lot of depth in it. I think it's something I could get really into. I think deck building for it will be really interesting.
Yes.
Like picking a class and a hero and then thinking, right, how do I want them to play? What attacks do I want? What kind of defense? That kind of thing. What weapons?
Yeah, so with the deck building element, when you crack a pack, so to speak, the cards have to match the type of hero.
Yeah.
Is that right?
They're either generic, or say you're playing a Guardian.
Yes.
It needs to say at the bottom Guardian attack or whatever.
Whereas other TCGs I've played, normally you can crack a pack and sort of mix them in and pretty much into anything.
Go by colour.
Colour is normally colour. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, normally by colour. I was just thinking that's true of Lorcana as well. One thing I think's interesting is thinking about whether we've chosen Pokemon versus Flesh and Blood because they are at different ends of the spectrum. And I just wonder whether the audiences for both Pokemon and Flesh and Blood, do they go both ways? You know, is it more that if you're a Flesh and Blood player and it would be easier to pick up a Pokemon game because you're going from quite a complex game to maybe you don't enjoy it for that reason because Pokemon's a little bit simpler, but would it work the other way around? You know, if do the audiences cross is what I guess I'm trying to say.
I suppose some capacity they will, because you and I are doing that. Have done it.
Yes.
I don't know. I mean, I think certain board gamers and tabletop gamers like us who are interested in kind of everything probably will, but I think generally speaking probably not, because Flesh and Blood, I mean, first of all, name-wise, it's quite grim.
Yes.
I know for a fact my wife won't play Flesh and Blood. Like I can already see us sitting down and me trying to sell it and probably not getting past that. But if we did, maybe getting a turn or two in before we kind of packed it away. Whereas Pokemon, I think she would. And I think if you're thinking about target demographics, Pokemon's generally a lot younger.
Yeah.
Flesh and Blood's kind of, I believe it was kind of intended as being a bit of a disruptor for games like Magic originally.
Yeah, it was created by some pro James, wasn't it? James White. I could be wrong there. I don't proclaim to be an expert on this, but yeah, it was made by Magic pros to disrupt the sort of Magic game.
Well, it's a lot more bleak, a bit more dark. You've got some silliness in there and some light-hearted stuff, but I just think, and this is obviously, it could just be us being idiots, but the fact we found it quite dense and had to watch a few rules videos and read through the rule book a few times before we started as quite experienced gamers. I don't see sort of younger teenagers, you know, preteens, whatever, being able to necessarily access it as easily as something like Pokemon.
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons I avoided Pokemon for so long is because I saw the audience as being a younger audience and I thought I was a bit too old for it. But actually, while it is aimed for a younger audience, that doesn't mean somebody like me can't pick it up and play it and enjoy it just because it's a little simpler than Flesh and Blood.
Well, that's funny, isn't it? And it kind of makes you think, and a bit of a segue question for you. Do you think Pokemon, the trading card game, almost falls victim to some of those other things? Like, for me, I think about like professional wrestling, Warhammer is a big one. You kind of think is really cool when you're sort of pre-teen in that kind of age group.
Yeah.
Then you hit your teenage years and it's like, oh, it's not cool. You know, that's a bit lame. I'm not going to let anyone know
that I used to.
Kids, And then when you get a bit older, you're like, oh, actually, this is cool. And I'm proud to kind of admit I like it. When we opened those Pokemon decks and I saw Smoliv in there, like that cute little olive guy smiling, I was like, that's cool. I like him.
Yeah. Yes. I get that a lot with characters. But you're right. And it's an interesting discussion that we can probably have on another podcast that you and I have talked about. Henry Cavill as an example. You know, as you get older and you get laughed at for enjoying board games in general, let alone Pokemon, you know, and Warhammer in Henry Cavill's case, and you see people laughing. And actually, no, it's okay to be of a certain age and still enjoy these games, you know? I want to be that little kid that, you know, just wants to enjoy playing games and having fun with my friends and forget about being an adult, you know, and having to work and stuff like that. So
what mortgage? I need more boosters.
Yeah. It's definitely not the way that my partner sees it, but yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm with you 100%.
Perfect. So to kind of round off then this first episode of Game versus Game, we're going to give a vote each for which game we think was better.
Okay.
And obviously that's not an objective standard. And we've played one game of this.
Yes.
This is certainly something that by all means in time we could switch opinions on, or
100%. I imagine we will.
So where's your vote going? Did you prefer Pokemon or Flesh and Blood? And in a summary, why?
Okay, I think I'm gonna side with Pokemon, and that's not because I didn't enjoy Flesh and Blood. I very much enjoyed Flesh and Blood, and think I will probably end up collecting Flesh and Blood a lot more than I will Pokemon, in all honesty. I like Pokemon because it was just a game I picked up very, very quickly. I can see myself collecting cards, not as much as Flesh and Blood because they are cheaper, and one that I think our partners can possibly get into. So it's one that I will enjoy in our group of friends more often. Flesh and Blood will be for you, me, maybe Albie, and if we can get Dave involved, that kind of thing, and just having a real meaty gaming session. So I think I'm going to choose Pokemon here, but it's very tight.
I'm going to go Flesh and Blood.
I thought you might.
I love the depth of it. But interestingly enough, I think I'm the opposite to you.
Okay.
I think I'm going to collect more Pokemon.
Interesting.
Because I feel Flesh and Blood, I really enjoyed the game, but it needs to be learnt. And I think I want to spend time learning those start decks, figuring out how to play them kind of optimally. We got a few boosters in that kind of starter set.
Yes.
And I can see me kind of trying different stuff out with the decks we've got, with the few we got in those boosters, and kind of seeing how the deck building works. And also with Flesh and Blood, I think I'm kind of mindful that there's a lot of prior sets. And unlike games like Magic and Pokemon, those prior sets aren't that hard to get hold of. So there's kind of time for me, or at least at the moment, for me to come back and think, that hero looks really cool. I want to see if I can track that down or whatever. Whereas Pokemon, I loved building that kind of, well, not building, but opening that green deck I had and seeing Smoliv and that kind of thing. And I want to get some packs and get some more. I opened that one earlier on with the Diplin. It was like a caramel apple character.
And then you wanted the evolved.
Well, the one it evolves from, Applin. So I want a kind of fruity, veggie deck.
Yes.
It's going to be great.
Yeah.
But I think just in terms of depth of gameplay, where I can see myself kind of going, Flesh and Blood for me. The balancing act of kind of discarding cards to block things or pay for stuff. Yeah. And the art style, that was kind of a winner for me. It's definitely something I'm going to stick with and get a bit obsessed with.
And I think you're right. I think my opinion will probably change as we play these games a little bit more. So, I just look forward to playing them as I do with any game. And I also look forward to our next game versus game and seeing what we pit against each other.
Scrabble versus Monopoly.
That would be interesting. I'm terrible at Scrabble. Not a game I actually enjoy.
Well, that was a quick second episode of Game vs. Game. There we go.
Yes. You're getting 2 for 1.
2 for 1 here.
2 for 1. If you did hear our special guest during this podcast, I do apologise. We have special guest Prince that joined us today. We're babysitting my brother's Pomeranian.
Okay, wonderful. So that rounds us up for the first ever episode of Game vs. Game on the Little Bear podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. It's a goodbye from me.
And it's a goodbye from me.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Before you leave, you must know you are beloved. Before you leave, remember I was with you.